What happens when a billion-dollar construction project becomes a death trap, and the only two people who can stop it are a broke single father and the secret billionaire standing right beside him? Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wind off Lake Michigan didn't just bite, it tore. At 4:30 in the morning, the sky over Chicago was still black, and the construction site on West Randolph looked like something out of a war zone. Scaffolding climbed into darkness. Concrete mixers sat silent, their drums crusted with ice. Somewhere in the maze of steel beams and rebar, a generator coughed to life, its diesel exhaust curling into the frozen air. Liam Carter stood at the edge of the site, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, and wondered, not for the first time, if he'd made a mistake coming here. His truck was parked on the street behind him, the engine still ticking as it cooled. The heater had given out 2 weeks ago, and he hadn't had the money to fix it. His daughter's orthodontist appointment had eaten the last of his savings, so he'd driven across the city with the windows cracked, his breath fogging in front of his face, telling himself this inspection would be quick. Get in, check the welds on the structural steel, sign off, and get home before Emma woke up. Except nothing about this project felt quick. He'd been hired as an independent structural engineer 3 months ago, brought in after the original consulting firm had walked off the job. No explanation, no warning. Just a terse email from the general contractor saying they needed someone who could work fast and keep his mouth shut. The pay was decent, better than decent, if he was honest, but the whole thing had a bad smell to it. Too many last-minute changes, too many materials shipments arriving without proper documentation, too many people on site who wouldn't look him in the eye. Liam pulled his hard hat from the passenger seat and stepped through the chain-link gate. The site was supposed to be empty at this hour. That's what the schedule said. But as he walked past the first row of columns, he heard it, a sharp, rhythmic hiss that cut through the wind like a blade. Welding. He stopped, his boots crunching on frozen gravel, and turned toward the sound. At the far end of the site, near the base of what would eventually be a 30-story tower, a blue-white arc flared in the darkness. Sparks rained down in a cascade of light, illuminating a figure crouched low against a steel beam. Liam couldn't make out much. Just the welding mask, the heavy gloves, the way the arc moved with absolute precision along the seam. He walked closer, his pulse ticking up. Whoever this was, they weren't supposed to be here. The welding crew didn't start until 7, and even if they had come early, they sure as hell wouldn't be working alone in the dark without a spotter. "Hey," Liam called out, raising his voice over the hiss of the torch. "You're not supposed to be working solo." The arc didn't stop. He tried again, louder this time. "I said, you're not supposed to—" The torch cut off. The silence that followed was so sudden it felt like a physical thing. The figure straightened, pulling off the welding mask, and Liam froze. It was a woman. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a braid and sharp, angular features that looked carved out of the same steel she'd been working on. Her coveralls were streaked with soot and grease, and there was a smudge of something dark across her cheekbone. She looked at him with the kind of steady, unflinching gaze that made him feel like he was the one who'd been caught trespassing. "You always sneak up on people in the dark?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an edge to it, like she was used to being challenged and had stopped caring a long time ago. Liam blinked. "I'm not sneaking. I'm the structural engineer on this project, and you're violating about 6 different safety protocols right now." She tilted her head, considering him. "You're Carter." It wasn't a question. "Yeah," he said slowly. "And you are?" "Busy." She turned back to the beam, setting the mask back on her head, and reached for the torch. Liam stepped forward, his irritation flaring. "Hold on. I don't care how busy you are. You don't work alone on a site like this. If something goes wrong, if you get hurt, I won't. You don't know that." She paused, the torch in her hand, and looked at him again. This time, there was something almost amused in her expression. "You always this worried about people you just met?" "I'm worried about the project," Liam shot back. "If you get yourself killed, it's my name on the inspection report. Then don't put your name on it. That's not how it works. Isn't it?" The question hung in the air between them, and Liam realized she wasn't just challenging him. She was testing him, seeing how far he'd push, how much he cared. He took a breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Look, I don't know who you are or why you're out here at 4 in the morning, but if you're part of the crew, you need to follow the rules. And if you're not part of the crew, you need to leave. Now." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable in the dim light. Then she set the torch down, pulled off her gloves, and extended a hand. "Isabella Cruz." Liam stared at her hand, then at her face. The name didn't mean anything to him, at least not right away. But there was something in the way she said it, like she expected it to. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, calloused. "You're with the welding crew?" "Not exactly." "Then what are you doing here?" She smiled, just barely, just enough to let him know she wasn't going to answer that question. "Same thing you are. Making sure this building doesn't fall down." Liam frowned. "That's my job." "Maybe we have the same job." "I doubt that." She picked up the torch again, her smile fading. "You can doubt all you want, Carter, but I'm not leaving. And if you try to make me, you're going to have a very short career on this project." There was no threat in her voice, just certainty. Like she knew something he didn't. Liam opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something about this woman, about the way she moved, the way she spoke, told him that pushing her right now would be a mistake. So instead, he crossed his arms and leaned against the nearest column. "Fine," he said, "but if you're staying, I'm watching. And if I see anything that looks unsafe, I'm shutting you down. I don't care who you know." Isabella didn't answer. She just pulled the mask back down, fired up the torch, and went back to work. "Debout." An hour later, the sky had lightened to a dull gray, and Liam's coffee, a thermos of lukewarm gas station sludge, had gone cold. He'd spent the entire time watching Isabella weld. At first, he'd been looking for mistakes, waiting for her to slip up so he could prove his point. But the longer he watched, the more he realized she wasn't going to. Her technique was flawless. The beads she laid were smooth, even, and perfectly spaced. She moved with the kind of confidence that only came from years of experience, adjusting the angle of the torch without hesitation, changing her position to compensate for the wind, never once letting the arc wander or sputter. It was the kind of work Liam had only seen from master welders, the kind of people who'd been doing this since before he was born. And yet here she was, working alone in the dark, on a site that should have been locked down. He wanted to ask her where she'd learned to weld like that, wanted to ask why she was here, what she was doing, and who the hell had given her access to the site. But every time he opened his mouth, she'd glance at him, just for a second, and he'd lose his nerve. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name. When she finally shut off the torch and pulled off her mask, the sun was starting to break through the clouds. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a fresh streak of soot, and looked at him. "You still here? Someone has to make sure you don't kill yourself." She almost smiled. "Thoughtful." "It's my job." "Right." She started packing up her gear, moving with the same methodical precision she'd used while welding. "You do a lot of inspections like this?" What do you mean?" "Standing around, watching people work." Liam bristled. "I'm not just standing around. I'm making sure the work meets code." "Does it?" He hesitated. He didn't want to admit it, but the truth was, her work was some of the best he'd seen on this site. Maybe the best. "Yeah," he said finally. "It does." Isabella nodded, slinging her tool bag over her shoulder. "Good. Then we don't have a problem." She started to walk away, but Liam called after her. "Wait." She stopped, glancing back. "You never told me what you're doing here," he said, "or who you're working for." Isabella studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she shrugged. "I work for the people who own the steel." "The supplier?" "Something like that." "That doesn't explain why you're out here welding at 4 in the morning." "No?" She agreed. "It doesn't." And with that, she turned and walked off into the growing light, leaving Liam standing alone in the middle of the site, holding his cold coffee and wondering what the hell he'd just walked into. Biscuit? By the time the rest of the crew arrived at 7, Liam had already finished his preliminary inspection. The structural steel was solid, better than solid actually. The welds were clean, the connections were tight, and the alignment was damn near perfect. Whoever had fabricated this steel knew what they were doing. But there were other problems. He'd found 3 missing bolts on the second-level bracing. Not stripped or broken, just gone, like someone had taken them out and forgotten to replace them. And on the east side of the foundation, there was a crack in one of the anchor plates. It wasn't big, maybe 2 inches long, but it was growing. He could see the fresh concrete dust around the edges, the way the metal had started to pull apart. It was the kind of thing that could turn into a disaster if it wasn't caught early. Liam made notes in his inspection log, taking photos with his phone, and flagged both issues for the general contractor. Then he walked back to his truck, started the engine, and sat there for a minute, staring at the site through the windshield. Something about this project didn't add up. The steel was top tier, the craftsmanship was impeccable, but the oversight was sloppy. Missing bolts, cracked plates, last-minute changes. It was like someone was building 2 different projects at the same time. One that was designed to last 100 years, and one that was barely designed at all. And then there was Isabella. He couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she'd worked, the way she'd looked at him, the way she'd shut him down without raising her voice. She wasn't like anyone he'd met on a construction site before. She was too precise, too controlled, too sure of herself. And she'd said she worked for the people who owned the steel. Liam pulled out his phone and opened the project folder. He scrolled through the documents until he found the material supplier, Cruz Steel Fabrication, based out of Gary, Indiana. Cruz's. He sat back in his seat, his pulse ticking up again. Isabella Cruz. It couldn't be a coincidence. He did a quick search on his phone, typing in Cruz Steel Fabrication owner, and the first result that came up made his stomach drop. Cruz Steel Fabrication, family owned since 1952. Current CEO, Isabella Maria Cruz. Liam stared at the screen, reading the bio twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it. Isabella Cruz wasn't just some welder working the night shift. She was the CEO of the company supplying the steel for this entire project. A company worth, according to the article, just over $1 billion. And she'd been out here at 4 a.m, welding alone in the dark. What the hell was she doing? Liam didn't see Isabella again for 3 days. He came back to the site every morning, running his inspections, checking the progress, and trying to keep the project on track. The missing bolts had been replaced, and the cracked anchor plate had been reinforced, but new problems kept cropping up. A shipment of rebar arrived with the wrong specifications. A concrete pour got delayed because the mixer broke down. The city inspector, a guy named Horace Delmar, started showing up unannounced, poking around and asking questions that felt more like threats than inquiries. "You sure this steel's up to code?" Delmar had asked him on the second day, tapping a column with the end of his pen. "Because I'm seeing some welds here that look a little questionable." Liam had bitten back his irritation. "The welds are fine. I've inspected them myself." "Yeah, but you're not a city inspector, are you?" "No, but I'm a licensed structural engineer, and I'm telling you the welds meet code." Delmar had smiled, a thin, unpleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that." And then he'd walked off, leaving Liam standing there with the uncomfortable feeling that he'd just been put on notice. It was late afternoon on the 3rd day when Liam finally saw Isabella again. He was on the 2nd level, checking the alignment of the floor beams when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting one of the crew, and found her standing at the top of the stairs. She was dressed the same as before, coveralls, work boots, her hair pulled back, but this time she wasn't carrying any tools, just a rolled-up set of blueprints under one arm. "Carter," she said, nodding at him. "Cruz." She walked over, unrolling the blueprints on top of a stack of plywood, and gestured for him to come closer. "You find anything else wrong?" "Depends on what you mean by wrong." "Missing bolts, cracks, things that shouldn't be there." Liam frowned. "How do you know about that?" "I read your inspection reports. Those are supposed to be confidential." She gave him a look that said she didn't care. "Are you going to answer the question or not?" Liam hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I found a few things. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make me nervous." "Show me." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the photos he'd taken, and handed it to her. She studied each one carefully, her expression darkening. "This crack," she said, zooming in on the anchor plate. "It's getting worse." I know, I flagged it for repair. Did they fix it? They reinforced it, but I don't think it's going to hold long term. Isabella handed the phone back, her jaw tight. What about the bolts? Replaced, but I don't know why they were missing in the first place. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at the blueprints, her fingers tracing the lines of the foundation as if she were looking for something she couldn't quite see. You think it's sabotage? Liam asked quietly. Isabella looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that looked almost like fear. I think, she said slowly, that someone's trying to make sure this building doesn't get finished. They worked together after that. It wasn't a formal partnership, nothing was ever said out loud. But Liam started staying later and Isabella started showing up earlier, and somehow they fell into a rhythm. He'd run his inspections, flagging anything that looked off, and she'd review the blueprints, cross-referencing his findings with the original design. When something didn't match, they'd dig deeper, tracing the problem back to its source. It was slow, meticulous work, the kind of thing that required patience and precision. But Liam found he didn't mind. There was something almost calming about working with someone who understood what was at stake, someone who cared as much as he did. And Isabella, despite her sharp edges and her refusal to explain anything, was good company. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was always direct. No small talk, no bullshit, just the facts. This beam's out of alignment, she'd say, pointing at a column, by half an inch. That's within tolerance. Barely. It'll hold. Will it? And then she'd look at him, waiting. And Liam would find himself double-checking his calculations just to be sure. It was annoying and strangely reassuring. One night, after the crew had gone home and the site was quiet again, they sat on a stack of steel beams, eating sandwiches Liam had brought from a deli near his apartment. The wind had picked up, and the temperature had dropped below freezing, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. You always work this late? Isabella asked, unwrapping her sandwich. Only when the project's a mess. She smiled faintly. So, always. Pretty much. Liam took a bite, chewing slowly. What about you? Don't you have a company to run? I do. Then why are you here? She didn't answer right away. She just stared out at the site, her expression distant. Because, she said finally, if I don't make sure it's done right, no one will. Liam wanted to ask what she meant by that. Wanted to ask why she didn't trust her own people to do the job. But something in her tone told him this wasn't the time. So instead he asked, how long have you been running Cruise Steel? 5 years. That's a lot of responsibility. It is. You ever think about doing something else? Isabella glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. Like what? I don't know. Something that doesn't involve freezing your ass off on construction sites at midnight. She almost laughed. No. Why not? Because this is what I'm good at. Liam nodded slowly. He understood that. He'd spent most of his adult life doing the same thing, choosing work over comfort, responsibility over ease. It was part of who he was, part of what kept him going. You have kids? Isabella asked suddenly. Liam blinked, caught off guard. Yeah, a daughter. Emma. She's 8. Just the two of you? Yeah. Isabella nodded, like she'd expected that answer. That's hard. It is. Liam looked down at his sandwich, his throat tightening. But it's worth it. I'm sure it is. They sat in silence for a while after that, the wind howling around them, and Liam realized, maybe for the first time, that he didn't feel quite so alone. The next morning, Liam arrived at the site to find Horace Delmar waiting for him. The city inspector was leaning against a concrete barrier, smoking a cigarette and looking every bit the part of a man who enjoyed making other people's lives difficult. He was in his 50s, with a paunch that strained the buttons of his shirt and a face that looked like it had been carved out of old leather. Morning, Carter, Delmar said, flicking ash onto the ground. Delmar. Liam kept his tone neutral. What can I do for you? Just wanted to check in, see how things are progressing. Everything's on schedule. That's so. Delmar took a long drag on his cigarette, his eyes narrowing. Because I've been hearing some concerns about the steel. Liam's pulse ticked up. What kind of concerns? Quality control. Safety standards. You know how it is. The steel's fine. I've inspected it myself. Yeah, but like I said before, you're not a city inspector. Delmar smiled that same unpleasant smile. And I'm thinking maybe we need to run some additional tests, just to be safe. Additional tests will delay the project. Maybe, but better safe than sorry, right? Liam stared at him, his jaw tightening. He knew what this was. Delmar was fishing, trying to find leverage, trying to create a problem where there wasn't one. I'll talk to the general contractor, Liam said carefully. You do that. Delmar dropped his cigarette and ground it out with his heel. And tell him I'll be back next week with a full inspection team. He walked off, leaving Liam standing there, his mind racing. Mom. That night, Liam told Isabella about Delmar's visit. They were back on the second level, going over the blueprints again. And when Liam explained what had happened, Isabella's expression went cold. He's dirty, she said flatly. You think? I know. She pointed to the section of the blueprints showing the foundation. This project's worth $30 million. If Delmar can delay it long enough, someone stands to make a lot of money. Who? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Liam looked at her, surprised by the steel in her voice. You think he's working with someone on the inside? I think he's working with someone who wants this project to fail. Why? Isabella didn't answer. She just rolled up the blueprints, her hands moving with quick, angry precision. We need to check everything, she said. Every weld, every bolt, every connection. If someone's sabotaging this site, I want to know where and how. Liam nodded. I'm with you. She looked at him, her eyes sharp. This is going to get messy, Carter. I know. And you're still in. Yeah, Liam said. I'm still in. But Isabella held his gaze for a long moment, and then, just barely, she smiled. Good, she said. Because I'm going to need you. They worked through the night. Liam checked every beam, every column, every connection, while Isabella cross-referenced the blueprints with the original design specs. They moved in silence, their breath fogging in the freezing air, their hands numb from the cold. And then, just after midnight, Liam found it. He was inspecting the bracing on the third level when he noticed something wrong. The bolts holding the connection together were loose, so loose he could turn them with his fingers. And when he looked closer, he saw that the threads had been stripped, deliberately. Isabella, he called out, his voice tight. She was there in seconds, crouching beside him, her face pale in the light of his headlamp. Someone did this on purpose, Liam said. Isabella reached out, touching the bolt, and her jaw clenched. Check the rest of the level. Liam did, and what he found made his stomach turn. Half the bolts on the third level had been loosened. Some were missing entirely, and in 2 places, the bracing had been cut. Not enough to make the structure collapse immediately, but enough to weaken it. Enough to make it dangerous. This isn't just sabotage, Liam said quietly. This is attempted murder. Isabella didn't answer. She just pulled out her phone, snapping photos of every compromised connection, her hands shaking. We need to shut this site down, Liam said. Now. No. He stared at her. What do you mean, no? If we shut it down, whoever's doing this wins. They get their delay. They get their leverage. And if we don't shut it down, someone could die. Isabella looked at him, her eyes blazing. Then we fix it, tonight. You're serious? I've never been more serious in my life. Liam opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he realized she was right. If they shut the site down, Delmar would swoop in, and the project would be tied up in red tape for months, maybe years, and whoever was behind this would walk away clean. But if they fixed it themselves, if they rebuilt every compromised connection, replaced every missing bolt, and made the structure safe again, they could beat them. They could finish the job. It was risky. It was insane. But it was the only option they had. All right, Liam said. Let's do it. Isabella nodded, already pulling her tools out of her bag. And together, they got to work. The first bolt took Liam 20 minutes to replace. His hands were so cold he could barely feel the wrench, and the threads kept catching on something he couldn't see in the dark. Isabella held the flashlight steady while he worked, not saying anything, just watching as he wrestled with the metal, until finally, the bolt seated properly and he could torque it down. 1, he muttered, sitting back on his heels. Isabella moved the light to the next connection. 47 to go. Liam looked at her. You counted. I always count. He wanted to ask her how she stayed so calm, how she could look at a structure that had been systematically sabotaged and not lose her mind. But he didn't have the energy, so he just picked up the next bolt and got back to work. They moved through the third level connection by connection, Liam replacing hardware while Isabella inspected every weld, every joint, every place where the steel came together. The wind had picked up again, driving sleet against the exposed beams, and the temperature had dropped low enough that Liam's breath came out in short white bursts. Around 2 in the morning, Isabella disappeared down the stairs without a word. Liam kept working, assuming she'd gone to get more supplies, but when she came back 15 minutes later, she was carrying 2 thermoses and a brown paper bag. Coffee, she said, handing him one of the thermoses, and something to eat. Liam unscrewed the cap and took a sip. The coffee was strong and hot enough to burn his tongue, and it tasted like the best thing he'd had in weeks. Where'd you get this? There's a diner 3 blocks from here. They know me. You walked there? In this? She shrugged, pulling a sandwich out of the bag. You need to eat. Liam wanted to argue, but his stomach had other ideas. He took the sandwich, turkey and Swiss on rye, and ate it in 4 bites, barely tasting it. Isabella watched him with something that might have been amusement. When's the last time you had a real meal? She asked. Does breakfast count? Not if it was a granola bar in your truck. Liam almost smiled. How'd you know? Because that's what I had too. They sat on a steel beam, drinking coffee and watching the sleet turn the construction site into a landscape of ice and shadow. Liam's back ached from crouching over bolts, and his fingers felt like they'd been hit with hammers, but he felt strangely awake, alert in a way he hadn't been in months. You ever do this before? He asked. Work through the night to fix someone else's mess? Isabella was quiet for a moment. Once, when I first took over the company. What happened? We had a fabrication error on a bridge project in Kentucky. 30 tons of steel cut to the wrong specs. The contractor wanted to use it anyway, said it was close enough. She took a sip of coffee, her eyes distant. I drove down there myself, pulled the steel, and had it recut. Cost us $200,000 and a month of delays. But you did it right. Yeah, I did it right. She looked at him. And the contractor never worked with us again. Worth it? Every time. Liam nodded slowly. He understood that kind of stubbornness. That refusal to compromise even when it cost you. It was the same thing that had gotten him blacklisted from half the engineering firms in Chicago. The same thing that kept him working inspections at 4 in the morning instead of sleeping in a warm bed. Your daughter, Isabella said suddenly. Emma, she know what you do? She knows I'm an engineer. Does she know you're out here freezing your ass off to make sure buildings don't fall down? Liam smiled despite himself. Not in those words. What does she think you do? She thinks I draw buildings on a computer and go to meetings. He paused. Which is what I used to do, before. Isabella didn't ask what before meant. She just waited, and somehow that made it easier to keep talking. I worked for a firm downtown, Liam said. Big projects, big clients, good money. Then we got hired to design a parking structure for a hospital. 6 levels, pre-stressed concrete. I ran the calculations, submitted the drawings, and the client approved everything. He stopped, staring at his coffee. Except they wanted to cut costs, reduce the rebar, thin out the slabs. My boss told me to make it work. And you didn't. I told them it was unsafe, that if we built it the way they wanted, it wouldn't last 10 years. Liam's jaw tightened. They fired me the next day. Did they build it? Yeah, with someone else's stamp on the drawings. He looked at her. It's still standing, for now. Isabella was quiet, and Liam wondered if he'd said too much. But then she reached over and squeezed his shoulder, just once, just for a second, and he felt something inside him unclench. You did the right thing, she said. Doesn't feel like it most days. It never does. They finished their coffee in silence, and then Isabella stood, brushing ice off her coveralls. Come on, we've got 30 more bolts to replace. Liam groaned, but got to his feet, following her back into the maze of steel. By 4 in the morning, they'd finished the 3rd level and moved down to the 2nd. The work was faster now. Liam's hands had gone numb enough that he couldn't feel the cold anymore, and Isabella had settled into a rhythm that was almost mechanical. She'd point, he'd replace, and they'd move to the next connection without talking. But the deeper they went, the worse it got. On the second level, they found an entire section of bracing that had been cut through. Not loosened, cut. Someone had taken a torch to the steel and sliced clean through the web, leaving the beam hanging by less than half its original capacity. If the load test had gone forward with the structure in this condition, the whole thing would have buckled. "This isn't sabotage," Liam said, staring at the cut. "This is demolition." Isabella ran her hand along the edge of the beam, her face unreadable. "They wanted it to fail during the test." "Why?" "Because then it's not their fault. It's ours." She pulled out her phone, taking photos from every angle. "They delay the project, blame the steel supplier, and walk away clean. You think Delmar's in on it?" "I think Delmar's the least of our problems." Liam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You know who's behind this." It wasn't a question. Isabella didn't answer right away. She just stood there staring at the severed beam, and Liam could see the calculations running behind her eyes. The risk assessment. The cost-benefit analysis. Whatever she was thinking, it wasn't good. "There's a consortium trying to buy my company," she said finally. "They've made 3 offers in the last year, each one higher than the last. And you turned them down. Every time. So they're trying to tank your reputation, make it look like your steel isn't safe." Isabella nodded. "If this project fails, it won't just hurt Crew Steel. It'll destroy us. And then they can buy the company for pennies on the dollar." Liam's stomach turned. "That's criminal," Isabella finished. "Yeah, it is." She looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something that looked like exhaustion in her eyes. "But I can't prove it. Not yet." "So what do we do?" "We fix this. We finish the job. And we make damn sure the test goes perfectly." Liam wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, that they should go to the police, to the contractors, to someone who could actually do something about this. But he knew it wouldn't matter. Once a project like this got tangled up in litigation, it was over, and Isabella would lose everything. "All right," he said, "let's fix it." Isabella pulled her welding gear out of her bag and fired up the torch. The arc flared to life, casting harsh blue-white light across the steel, and Liam held the beam steady while she worked. She didn't just weld, she rebuilt, cutting away the damaged section, fitting a new piece of steel into place, and joining it with beads so clean they looked machine-made. It took her an hour to repair the first cut, and by the time she finished, Liam's arms were shaking from holding the beam in position. "You good?" Isabella asked, pulling off her mask. "Yeah," Liam lied. She gave him a look that said she didn't believe him, but she didn't push it. She just moved to the next cut and started over. They worked until the sun came up, and by the time the first crew members started arriving, they'd repaired 4 of the 6 severed beams. Liam's entire body felt like it had been put through a compressor, and Isabella's face was streaked with soot and exhaustion, but they didn't stop. "You two been here all night?" one of the welders asked, staring at them. "Just finishing some detail work," Isabella said, not looking up from the torch. The welder frowned. "You're the boss from Crews, right?" "That's right." "What the hell are you doing welding?" Isabella shut off the torch and pulled off her mask, meeting his eyes. "Making sure the job gets done right." The welder opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Liam, then back at Isabella, and finally just shook his head and walked off. Liam waited until the welder was out of earshot. "You're going to blow your cover." "I don't care." "You should. If people find out the CEO of the steel company is out here doing repairs herself, then maybe they'll take this project seriously." Liam didn't have an answer for that, so he just picked up the next beam and held it in place while Isabella welded. By mid-morning, they'd finished the second level and moved down to the foundation. This was where Liam had found the cracked anchor plate, and when they got there, he saw immediately that the temporary repair hadn't held. The crack had spread another 2 inches, and the concrete around the base was starting to crumble. "We need to replace the whole plate," Isabella said, crouching next to it. "That's a 6-hour job, minimum." "Then we'd better get started." Liam looked at her. "You haven't slept." "Neither have you." "I'm not the one running a billion-dollar company." Isabella smiled faintly. Right now, neither am I. Right now, I'm just a welder. She pulled out her tools and got to work, and Liam found himself wondering, not for the first time, what it must be like to carry that kind of weight. To be responsible not just for a project, but for hundreds of employees, thousands of tons of steel, and a legacy that stretched back 70 years. He thought about his own daughter, about the weight of being a single father, and realized it wasn't that different, just a different scale. They worked through lunch, through the afternoon, through the point where Liam's vision started to blur and his hands stopped obeying his brain. Isabella didn't slow down. If anything, she worked faster, like she was trying to outrun something Liam couldn't see. Around 3 in the afternoon, Liam's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered anyway, stepping away from the noise of the site. "Mr. Carter?" a woman's voice said. "This is Principal Hayes from Emerson Elementary. We need you to come pick up Emma." Liam's heart dropped. "Is she okay? What happened?" "She's fine, but she got into an altercation with another student, and we have a zero-tolerance policy." "An altercation? Emma doesn't fight." "I understand, Mr. Carter, but the policy is clear. You need to come get her. Now." Liam looked back at the site, at Isabella crouched over the anchor plate, at the half-finished repairs that still needed another 3 hours of work. He thought about the load test scheduled for tomorrow morning, about what would happen if they didn't finish, about everything riding on this. And then he thought about his daughter, sitting in the principal's office, scared and alone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, and hung up. When he walked back over to Isabella, she took one look at his face and stood. "What's wrong?" "I have to go. My daughter. There's a problem at school." "Is she hurt?" "No, but I need to pick her up. I'm sorry, Go, Isabella said. "I've got this." Liam hesitated. "You can't do this alone." "I've been doing it alone for 5 years, Carter. I'll manage." "Isabella." "Go," she said again, and this time there was something in her voice that made it an order. Liam grabbed his jacket and started toward his truck, but halfway there he stopped and turned back. Isabella was already kneeling by the anchor plate again, her torch firing up, and for a second he almost went back. But then his phone buzzed with a text from the school, and he forced himself to keep walking. The drive to Emma's school felt like it took forever. Traffic was a nightmare, his truck's heater was still broken, and every stoplight seemed designed specifically to delay him. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, his jaw was clenched so tight it ached. Emma was sitting in the principal's office, her arms crossed and her face set in that stubborn expression she got when she was trying not to cry. When she saw Liam, something in her face crumbled, and she ran to him. "Dad!" "It's okay," Liam said, wrapping his arms around her. "I'm here. It's okay." Principal Hayes was a thin woman in her 50s with the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen every kind of trouble a kid could get into and wasn't impressed by any of it. She explained that Emma had pushed another student, a boy named Tyler, after he'd made fun of her jacket. "It's old and has holes in it," Emma said quietly, not looking at Liam. "He said I looked homeless." Liam felt something twist in his chest. The jacket was old. He'd bought it for her 2 years ago, and she'd grown since then. He'd been meaning to get her a new one, but between the bills and the truck and everything else, it kept getting pushed back. "I'm sorry," he said to Principal Hayes. "It won't happen again." "I hope not, Mr. Carter. Emma's a good student, but we can't tolerate violence. She's 8 years old. She pushed a kid who was bullying her. Our policy is bullshit," Liam said, and then immediately regretted it. But he was too tired, too angry, too stretched, too thin to take it back. Principal Hayes' expression hardened. "Mr. Carter, if you can't control your language—" "I'm taking my daughter home," Liam said, standing. "Come on, Em." They walked out of the school together, Emma's small hand in his, and Liam felt the weight of the day crash down on him all at once. He wanted to tell her it was okay. The kids were cruel and she hadn't done anything wrong, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just opened the truck door and helped her climb in. They drove home in silence, and when they got to the apartment, a cramped 2-bedroom in a building that smelled like old carpet and cigarette smoke, Liam made her a grilled cheese sandwich and sat with her at the kitchen table while she ate. "I'm sorry, Dad," Emma said finally, staring at her plate. "You don't have anything to apologize for." "But I pushed him. He was being a jerk." Principal Hayes said violence is never the answer. What? A stat the shot. Liam took a breath. Principal Hayes isn't wrong, but sometimes people push you until you don't have any other choice. He reached across the table and took her hand. Just, next time, try to walk away first, okay? Emma nodded, but Liam could see she didn't really believe him. And honestly, he wasn't sure he believed it either. After Emma went to bed, Liam sat on the couch and stared at his phone. He wanted to call Isabella to see if she'd finished the repairs, but it was almost 10, and he didn't want to bother her. So instead, he pulled up his inspection notes and started reviewing them, trying to figure out if there was anything they'd missed. His phone buzzed with a text. It was from Isabella. No words, just a photo, the anchor plate. Fully replaced, the welds clean and perfect, the concrete poured and smoothed. Finished. Liam stared at the photo, something tight loosening in his chest. He texted back, "You did all that yourself?" Her response came a minute later. "Told you I'd manage." "Thank you. Your daughter okay?" Liam hesitated, then typed, "Yeah, she's okay. Good." He waited to see if she'd say anything else, but the screen stayed dark. So he set the phone down and leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes. He was asleep in under a minute. The next morning, Liam woke to the sound of his phone ringing. It was still dark outside, and when he checked the screen, he saw it was barely 5 in the morning. The call was from Isabella. "Yeah?" He answered, his voice rough with sleep. "We've got a problem." Liam sat up, his heart already pounding. "What kind of problem?" "Delmar showed up an hour ago with his inspection team. They're going through everything." "That's not supposed to happen until next week." "I know, but he's here, and he's got a warrant." Liam was out of bed and pulling on his jeans before she finished the sentence. "I'm on my way." He scribbled a note for Emma, left it on the kitchen table, and was out the door in under 5 minutes. The drive to the site felt surreal. The streets empty, the sky just starting to lighten. His hands gripping the wheel so tight, his knuckles went white. When he pulled up to the site, he saw Delmar's car parked near the gate, along with 2 other vehicles Liam didn't recognize. He grabbed his hard hat and walked through the entrance, his pulse hammering. Isabella was standing near the second level, arms crossed, watching as Delmar and 2 other inspectors moved through the structure with clipboards and cameras. When she saw Liam, she walked over. "How bad is it?" Liam asked quietly. "They're looking for anything they can use to shut us down." "Did they find anything?" "Not yet, but they're not finished." Liam watched as Delmar stopped at one of the connections they'd repaired, running his hand over the bolts. He pulled out a wrench and tested the torque, then made a note on his clipboard. "That's the connection we fixed," Liam said under his breath. "I know." Delmar looked up and saw them watching. He smiled, that same thin, unpleasant smile, and walked over. "Morning, folks," he said. "Hope you don't mind us stopping by." "You're supposed to give 48 hours notice," Liam said. "Warrant overrides that. Public safety concern." "What concern?" Delmar gestured vaguely at the structure. "Got a tip that there might be some quality control issues. Thought we'd better check it out." "A tip from who?" "Anonymous." Isabella stepped forward, her voice cold. "This is harassment, Delmar." "It's my job, Miss Cruz." He looked her up and down, his smile widening. "Or should I say, Miss CEO? Didn't realize we had royalty on site. I'm here to make sure the work is done right. That's what inspectors are for." "Not all inspectors do their jobs." Delmar's smile faded. "You accusing me of something? Should I be?" The air between them went taut, and Liam stepped in before it could snap. "Look, we've got the load test scheduled for this afternoon. If you want to inspect, inspect. But don't slow us down." Delmar turned to him, his eyes hard. "Load test's been postponed." Liam's stomach dropped. "What?" "Per the warrant. Until we've completed our inspection, no testing moves forward. That's going to delay the project by weeks. Then you'd better hope we don't find anything." Delmar walked away, leaving Liam and Isabella standing in the cold morning air, watching as the inspection team spread through the site like a virus. "This is it," Isabella said quietly. "This is how they kill the project." Liam looked at her, saw the exhaustion in her face, the way her shoulders had started to curve inward under the weight of everything. And he made a decision. "No," he said. "It's not. Carter, we didn't spend all night fixing this just to let them tear it down. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. I know someone, a reporter. She's been trying to get a story on construction corruption for months. What are you doing? Fighting back. Isabella stared at him and then, slowly, she smiled. All right, she said, let's fight. The reporter's name was Sarah Vance, and she arrived at the construction site 40 minutes after Liam called her, wearing a wool coat that looked too expensive for someone who made their living digging through city records. She had sharp eyes and a notebook that was already half filled with notes before she even stepped through the gate. You said you had something on Delmar, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Liam gestured towards the structure. He's running an inspection right now, unannounced. Claims he got an anonymous tip about quality control issues. And did he? The quality control is fine. We checked everything ourselves. Sarah looked past him at Isabella, who was standing near the second level with her arms crossed, watching Delmar's team like a hawk. That's Isabella Cruz, the Steel CEO. Yeah. What's she doing here? Making sure her company doesn't get destroyed by a shakedown. Sarah's eyebrows went up. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Liam pulled out his phone and showed her the photos he'd taken the night before. The severed beams, the missing bolts, the deliberately damaged connections. Someone sabotaged this site. We fixed it. And now Delmar shows up with a warrant trying to shut us down before we can prove the work is solid. Sarah studied the photos, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at the inspection team moving through the structure. You think Delmar's involved? I think someone paid him to delay this project, and I think if you start digging, you'll find a connection. To who? Liam glanced at Isabella. She was still watching Delmar, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set. He turned back to Sarah. There's a consortium trying to buy Cruz Steel. They've made multiple offers. She's turned them all down. So they're trying to tank her reputation. That's the theory. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her pen tapping against her notebook. You have proof? Not yet. But if you can tie Delmar to the consortium, financial records, phone calls, anything, we might have a case. That could take weeks. We don't have weeks. We have hours. Sarah looked at him, and Liam could see her doing the math, weighing the risk against the story, the potential payoff against the very real possibility that she'd come up empty. All right, she said finally. I'll make some calls, but I need you to keep Delmar here. Don't let him leave until I've had a chance to verify a few things. How am I supposed to do that? You're the engineer, figure it out. She walked off, already pulling out her phone, and Liam felt a spike of panic. He had no idea how to stall a city inspector who was actively trying to shut down a project, but he also didn't have any other options. He walked over to Isabella, who was still watching Delmar. Reporter's on it, he said quietly. Think she'll find anything? I don't know, but it's better than sitting here waiting for Delmar to bury us. Isabella nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the inspection team. One of them, a younger guy with a clipboard, was taking measurements of the repaired anchor plate, comparing them against the original blueprints. Every few seconds he'd make a note, his expression growing more confused. He's not finding anything wrong, Isabella said. Good. No, not good. Because if he doesn't find anything, Delmar's going to make something up. Liam's stomach tightened. You really think he'd do that? I think he's desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. As if on cue, Delmar walked over to the younger inspector, looked at his clipboard, and then shook his head. They had a brief conversation, too quiet for Liam to hear, and then Delmar walked toward one of the upper levels, the younger inspector trailing behind him. Come on, Isabella said, already moving. They followed Delmar up to the third level, where he stopped at one of the connections they'd spent hours repairing. He pulled out a wrench and tested the bolts, then ran his hand along the weld seam. His face was unreadable, but Liam could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. Problem? Isabella asked. Delmar didn't look at her. This weld's substandard. No, it's not. I'm the inspector. I say it is. Isabella stepped closer, her voice dropping. That weld was done to AWSD 1.1 specifications. I did it myself. Delmar finally looked at her, his smile cold. Delmar finally, then maybe you're not as good as you think you are. Or maybe you're not as honest. The air went tight. Delmar's smile faded, and for a second Liam thought he was going to say something, but then he just turned to the younger inspector. Mark this connection as non-compliant. We'll need a full reinspection before any load testing can proceed. That's going to delay the project by us. I don't care what it delays, Delmar snapped. My job is to make sure this structure is safe, and right now, I'm not convinced it is. He walked off, leaving Isabella standing there with her hands clenched into fists. Liam waited until Delmar was out of earshot. He's going to fail us no matter what we do. I know. So what do we do? Isabella looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something that looked like doubt in her eyes. I don't know. They stood there in silence, the wind cutting through the open structure, and Liam felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. The sabotage, the corruption, the fact that he'd spent the last 2 nights working himself to exhaustion for a project that was about to get killed anyway. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. Found something. Meet me at the coffee shop on Monroe in 30. Liam showed Isabella the message. You want to come? She hesitated, then shook her head. I need to stay here. Make sure Delmar doesn't plant anything. You think he would? At this point, yeah. I think he would. Liam wanted to argue, but he knew she was right, so he just nodded and headed for his truck. The coffee shop was a small place with cracked vinyl booths and an espresso machine that looked like it had survived a war. Sarah was sitting in the back corner, her laptop open and a stack of documents spread across the table. You were right, she said as soon as Liam sat down. Delmar's dirty. Liam's pulse jumped. How dirty? 3 months ago, he received a payment for $50,000 from a shell company called Northfield Holdings. I traced it back through 2 intermediaries, and guess who owns Northfield? The consortium trying to buy Cruise Steel. Close. One of the board members. Guy named Marcus Haviland. He's also on the City Planning Commission, which is how Delmar got the warrant pushed through so fast. Liam sat back, his mind racing. Can you prove it? I've got bank records, emails, and a paper trail that ties Haviland to at least 4 other projects where inspectors suddenly found problems after Cruise Steel was hired. Sarah pulled out a printed email and slid it across the table. This one's from Haviland to Delmar, sent 2 weeks ago. Read it. Liam picked up the email. It was short, only 3 lines, but it was enough to make his blood run cold. Need the Randolph project delayed, whatever it takes. Usual terms. Usual terms, Liam said quietly, meaning he's done this before. Multiple times. And he's been getting away with it because no one's ever been able to prove the connection. Sarah leaned forward. But if you can get Delmar on record admitting to the bribe, or even just acknowledging he received the payment, I can run this story tonight. How am I supposed to do that? You're smart. You'll figure it out. Liam stared at her. You're asking me to wear a wire and confront a corrupt city inspector. I'm asking you to do what you've been doing this whole time. Stand up for what's right. That's easy for you to say. You don't have a kid depending on you. Sarah's expression softened. No, but I've got a city full of people depending on me to tell the truth. And right now, you're the only one who can help me do that. Liam wanted to say no. Wanted to walk away and let someone else deal with this mess. But then he thought about Isabella, standing alone on that construction site, fighting to save her company. Thought about Emma, sitting in the principal's office because she couldn't afford a new jacket. Thought about every compromise he'd watched other people make, every time someone had looked the other way because it was easier. All right, he said. I'll do it. Sarah smiled and pulled a small recording device out of her bag. Good, because I already brought the wire. 20 minutes later, Liam was back at the construction site with the recorder clipped to the inside of his jacket. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it, but he forced himself to walk calmly toward the second level, where Delmar was still going through his inspection. Isabella saw him coming and raised an eyebrow. Liam gave her a small nod, and she seemed to understand. She stayed where she was, watching, but didn't approach. Delmar! Liam called out. Got a minute? The inspector turned, his expression guarded. What do you want, Carter? Just wanted to talk, off the record. Delmar's eyes narrowed. About what? About how we can make this work for everyone. There was a long pause. Then Delmar gestured for the younger inspector to give them some space. Once they were alone, he crossed his arms. I'm listening. Liam took a breath, trying to keep his voice steady. Look, I know this project's been a pain in your ass. Lots of problems, lots of delays, but we've fixed everything. The structure's solid now. That's not what my inspection shows. Your inspection's wrong. Delmar smiled faintly. Careful, Carter. That's a serious accusation. So is taking bribes. The smile vanished. Delmar's face went hard and he stepped closer. You want to say that again? Liam's pulse was hammering, but he held his ground. I know about Northfield Holdings. I know about the 50,000. And I know Marcus Haviland sent you an email 2 weeks ago telling you to delay this project. For a second, Delmar just stared at him. Then he laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're bluffing. Am I? Delmar's eyes flicked to Liam's jacket, and Liam saw the exact moment he realized what was happening. His expression shifted from anger to something colder, something dangerous. You're wearing a wire, Delmar said quietly. Liam didn't answer. Delmar took another step closer, his voice dropping. You think you're clever? You think you can just walk in here and record me? I think you're corrupt, and I think you're about to get exposed. You have no idea what you're doing, Carter. You have no idea who you're messing with. Then why don't you tell me? Delmar's jaw tightened, and for a second Liam thought he was going to take the bait. But then he smiled, that same thin, unpleasant smile, and shook his head. Nice try, he said, but I'm not stupid. He turned and walked away, calling out to his team that they were done for the day. Liam stood there, his hands shaking, and watched them leave. Isabella walked over, her face tense. Did it work? I don't know. He didn't admit anything, but he didn't deny it either. Liam pulled out the recorder and replayed the conversation. Delmar's words were clear, his tone unmistakable. It wasn't a confession, but it was close. Close enough that Sarah might be able to use it. He sent the audio file to Sarah and waited. Her response came 5 minutes later. Not enough for criminal charges, but enough to run the story. I'm publishing tonight. Liam showed Isabella the message, and he saw something in her expression shift. Relief, maybe. Or just exhaustion. What happens now? Wait, she asked. Now we wait. And hope it's enough. They didn't have to wait long. The story went live at 6 that evening, and by 7, Liam's phone was blowing up. Calls from the general contractor, from the project owner, from people he hadn't talked to in years. Everyone wanted to know if it was true, if Delmar was really on the take, if the project was safe. Isabella's phone was worse. She stood near the edge of the site, her back to Liam, talking in rapid Spanish to someone who was clearly not happy. When she finally hung up, she looked drained. My board wants me to pull out, she said. Can you? Legally? Yes? Practically? She shook her head. If I pull out now, it'll look like I'm admitting the steel was bad. We'll lose every contract we have. So you're staying? I don't have a choice. Liam wanted to tell her it would be okay, that the truth would come out and justice would be served and everything would work out the way it was supposed to. But he'd been around long enough to know that wasn't how the world worked. What about the load test? He asked. Isabella checked her phone. They're reinstating it tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. That fast? The project owner doesn't want any more delays. And with the story out, they're scrambling to prove everything's above board. Are we ready? Isabella looked at the structure, her eyes tracing the lines of steel they'd spent 2 nights repairing. We'd better be. That night, Liam went home and tried to act normal. He made dinner for Emma, spaghetti with jarred sauce, the only thing he had time for, and helped her with her homework. But his mind was somewhere else, running through calculations and stress tests and worst-case scenarios. Dad? Emma asked, looking up from her math worksheet. Yeah? Are you okay? Liam blinked. What? You look tired. I am tired, kiddo. Is it because of work? He wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything was fine and not to worry, but Emma was too smart for that. She'd see right through him. Yeah, he said. It's because of work. Is it a big project? Pretty big. Are you building something cool? Liam smiled despite himself. I'm trying to make sure something doesn't fall down. Emma frowned. That doesn't sound as fun. It's not, but it's important. She went back to her homework, and Liam sat there watching her, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. If the test failed tomorrow, if the structure didn't hold, it wouldn't just be his career that was over. It would be Isabella's company, the jobs of everyone working on the project, and the safety of everyone who'd eventually work in that building. No pressure. He put Emma to bed at 9, read her a chapter from the book they'd been working through, and then sat on the couch, staring at his phone. He wanted to call Isabella, to check in and make sure she was okay. But it was late, and he didn't know what he'd even say. His phone buzzed with a text. From Isabella. You awake? Liam typed back, Yeah, can't sleep. Me neither. Nervous about tomorrow? There was a long pause before her next message came through, terrified. Liam stared at the word, feeling something shift in his chest. Isabella, who'd welded through the night without flinching, who'd stared down Delmar without blinking, who carried the weight of an entire company on her shoulders, was terrified. He typed, Me too. Think it'll hold? I know it will. We did the work. We fixed everything. What if we missed something? We didn't. You sound sure. I trust you. There was another long pause, and Liam wondered if he'd said too much. But then his phone buzzed again. I trust you too. Liam sat there staring at the screen, and for the first time in 2 days, he felt something that wasn't fear or exhaustion or anger. He felt hope. He typed, Get some sleep. We've got a big day tomorrow. You too, Carter. He set his phone down and closed his eyes, and this time, when sleep came, it came easier. The morning of the load test, Liam arrived at the site at 6:30. The sky was overcast, and the air smelled like snow. A crowd had already gathered, engineers, contractors, city officials, and even a few reporters who'd caught wind of Sarah's story. Everyone wanted to see if the structure would hold. Isabella was already there, standing near the base of the tower with her arms crossed. She looked like she hadn't slept, but her eyes were clear and focused. Ready? Liam asked, as I'll ever be. The load test was simple in theory. They'd stack massive concrete blocks on the 3rd level, simulating the maximum weight the structure was designed to handle, and then measure the deflection. If the beams stayed within tolerance, the structure passed. If they didn't, the whole thing would need to be torn down and rebuilt. Liam had run the calculations a dozen times. On paper, everything should hold, but paper didn't account for sabotage, for deliberately cut beams and missing bolts. Paper didn't account for the 2 nights they'd spent frantically repairing damage that should never have existed in the first place. At 7:30, the crane operator started lifting the first concrete block into place. It weighed 10,000 pounds, and as it swung through the air, Liam felt his stomach clench. The block settled onto the 3rd level with a heavy thud, and everyone held their breath. Nothing happened. No cracking, no groaning, no movement. Liam checked his instruments. The deflection was minimal, well within tolerance. He looked at Isabella. She nodded. They loaded the 2nd block, then the 3rd, then the 4th. Each time, Liam expected something to go wrong, expected a weld to fail or a connection to buckle, or the whole structure to come down in a screaming collapse of steel and concrete. But it didn't. By the time they loaded the 10th block, the maximum load the test called for, the structure had deflected less than an inch. The welds were holding. The bolts were solid. Everything they'd repaired was performing exactly the way it was supposed to. Liam felt something in his chest loosen, and when he looked at Isabella, he saw tears in her eyes. We did it, she said quietly. Yeah, we did. The test supervisor, a gruff man in his 60s who'd been doing this longer than Liam had been alive, walked over with his clipboard. He checked the measurements, compared them against the design specs, and then nodded. Structure passes, he said. Good work. Isabella let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her lungs for days. Liam wanted to say something, wanted to tell her how proud he was, how impressed, how grateful. But before he could, a black sedan pulled up to the site, and Marcus Haviland stepped out. He was tall, silver-haired, and dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Liam made in a month. He walked toward them with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about consequences. Ms. Cruz, he said, extending a hand. Congratulations on passing the test. Isabella didn't take his hand. What do you want, Haviland? Just wanted to extend an olive branch. I know things have been difficult lately, but I think we can still work together. Work together? You tried to destroy my company. Haviland's smile didn't waver. I tried to buy your company. There's a difference. Not when you're sabotaging my projects to drive down the price. That's a serious accusation. I hope you have proof. I have emails, bank records, a reporter who's been digging through your financial history for the past 24 hours. Haviland's smile finally faded. Those emails prove nothing. Smile. They prove enough. Delmar's already been suspended pending investigation. And if I find out you had anything to do with the sabotage on this site, I'll make sure you spend the next decade in court. Haviland stared at her, his jaw tight. Then he turned and walked back to his car without another word. Liam watched him drive away, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. You think he'll back off? For now, Isabella said, but men like him don't give up easily. Neither do you. She looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, she smiled. Really smiled. No, I don't. The rest of the day was a blur. The concrete blocks were removed, the test was officially signed off, and the project was cleared to move forward. The crew celebrated with coffee and donuts from a nearby bakery, and Liam found himself standing on the third level with Isabella, looking out over the city. What happens now, he asked. Now we finish the building, and hope nothing else goes wrong. You think it will? I think there's always something. Isabella turned to him. But I also think we can handle it. Liam nodded. Yeah, I think we can. They stood there in silence, the wind cold against their faces, and Liam realized he didn't want this moment to end. Didn't want to go back to his cramped apartment and his pile of bills and the constant worry that he was one mistake away from losing everything. But then his phone rang, and the moment shattered. It was Emma's school. Again. I have to take this, Liam said, stepping away. Mr. Carter, Principal Hayes said. I'm calling about Emma. Liam's stomach dropped. What happened? Nothing serious, but she's been asking to speak with you, says it's important. Can you put her on? There was a pause, and then Emma's voice came through the line. Dad? Hey kiddo, what's up? I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Liam blinked. What? Mrs. Chen said you were in the news about the building. She said you stopped bad people from hurting other people. Yeah, I guess I did. That's really cool, Dad. Liam felt his throat tighten. Thanks, Em. Are you coming home soon? Yeah, I'll be there in an hour. Okay, love you. Love you too. He hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at his phone. Isabella walked over. Everything okay? Yeah, just my daughter. She sounds like a good kid. She is. Liam looked at her. Thanks for everything. I should be thanking you. You didn't have to do any of this. Yeah, I did. Isabella tilted her head. Why? Liam thought about it, about the real answer beneath all the practical reasons. Because someone has to. She smiled. Yeah, someone does. Liam left the site that afternoon feeling like he'd just run a marathon. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache, and his eyes burned from lack of sleep. But underneath the exhaustion was something else, something that felt almost like relief. The drive home took longer than it should have. Traffic on the Kennedy was backed up for miles, and his truck's radio had stopped working sometime during the night, so he sat in silence, watching the brake lights ahead of him flare red in the gray afternoon light. When he finally pulled up to his building, Emma was sitting on the front steps waiting for him. She'd wrapped herself in an old blanket, and her breath made small clouds in the cold air. You're supposed to wait inside, Liam said, climbing out of the truck. I wanted to see you. He sat down next to her on the concrete steps, and she leaned against him. For a while they just sat there, not talking, watching cars pass on the street. Mrs. Chen showed us the article, Emma said finally, about the building inspector. Yeah? She said you were brave. Liam almost laughed. He didn't feel brave. He felt tired and scared and like he'd barely survived something that should have killed him. I just did my job. The article said you stopped someone from hurting people. I tried to. Emma was quiet for a moment. Was it scary? Liam thought about Delmar's face when he'd realized Liam was wearing a wire. Thought about standing on that construction site at 4 a.m, staring at severed beams and knowing someone had tried to make the building collapse. Thought about the weight of everything that could have gone wrong. Yeah, he said. It was scary. But you did it anyway. Someone had to. Emma nodded like that made sense to her. I'm glad it was you. Liam felt his throat tighten. He wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close, and they sat there on the steps until the cold drove them inside. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Liam sat at his kitchen table with a beer he didn't really want and stared at his phone. He'd gotten 17 missed calls, most of them from numbers he didn't recognize. Probably reporters wanting a statement, or lawyers circling like sharks, or people he used to work with suddenly remembering his name. He ignored all of them except one. Isabella had texted him around 8. You make it home okay? He typed back, Yeah. You? Still at the office, dealing with the board? How bad is it? Could be worse. At least they're not trying to fire me anymore. Liam smiled despite himself. That's progress. Small victories. There was a pause, then another message came through. Thank you for today. For all of it. You don't have to thank me. I know, but I'm doing it anyway. Liam stared at the screen, trying to figure out what to say. He wanted to tell her that working with her had been the first time in years he'd felt like he was doing something that mattered, that she'd made him remember why he'd become an engineer in the first place. But all of that felt too big, too complicated, so he just typed, Get some sleep. You've earned it. You too, Carter. He set his phone down and finished his beer, and for the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe. The next morning, Liam woke up to find his phone buzzing with a call from the general contractor. He answered it on the third ring, his voice still rough with sleep. Carter, it's Ben Morrison. We need to talk. Liam sat up, instantly awake. Morrison was the guy running the whole Randolph project, and he didn't call people unless something was wrong. What's going on? Can you come to the site? Now? It's 6 in the morning. I know what time it is. Can you come or not? Liam rubbed his face. Yeah, give me 30 minutes. He threw on the same clothes he'd worn yesterday, left another note for Emma, and drove back to the construction site. The sun was just starting to come up, turning the sky a pale orange that reflected off the steel beams like fire. Morrison was waiting for him near the entrance, a stocky man in his 50s with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He didn't look happy. What's this about? Liam asked. Morrison gestured toward the structure. We've got a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where someone put a crack in one of the main support columns overnight. Liam's stomach dropped. Show me. They walked to the east side of the foundation, and Morrison pointed to a column that Liam had inspected just 2 days ago. There was a crack running diagonally across the base, maybe 6 inches long and deep enough that Liam could see into the concrete. This wasn't here yesterday, Liam said. I know. I checked it myself after the load test. Liam crouched next to the column, running his fingers along the crack. The edges were clean, too clean. This wasn't the kind of damage that happened from stress or settling. This was deliberate. Someone did this on purpose, he said quietly. Morrison's jaw tightened. That's what I thought, which means we've still got a saboteur on site, or someone who really doesn't want this project to finish. Either way, we need to fix it, today, before the city sends another inspector. Liam stood, his mind already running through options. The crack was bad, but it wasn't catastrophic. If they could stabilize the column and reinforce the damaged section, they might be able to save it. But it would take time and money, and they'd already burned through most of both. I'll need to bring in Isabella, Liam said. Her crew can handle the reinforcement work. Morrison hesitated. The board's not thrilled about Crew's steel right now. The board wasn't out here at 4 in the morning fixing sabotaged beams. Isabella was. I know. But after that article, everyone knows this project was targeted. If we don't use the best people to fix it, we're just asking for more problems. Morrison stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, call her. But I want this done fast and quiet. No more reporters, no more drama. Can't promise that. Try. Liam pulled out his phone and called Isabella. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert like she'd been awake for hours. Carter, what's wrong? We've got another crack. East foundation column. Looks deliberate. There was a pause. I'm on my way. She hung up before he could say anything else. Isabella arrived 20 minutes later in a black pickup truck that looked like it had seen better days. She was wearing the same coveralls as always, her hair pulled back, and she carried a tool bag that was nearly as big as she was. Show me, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Liam led her to the column, and she crouched next to it, her face unreadable. She ran her hand along the crack, then pulled out a small hammer and tapped the concrete. The sound was dull, hollow. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, she said. This isn't random vandalism. They hit it right at the weak point. Can we fix it? Yeah, but we'll need to pour a new footing and add steel reinforcement plates. It's going to take at least 2 days. Morrison, who'd been standing off to the side, swore under his breath. We don't have 2 days. The city's scheduled a final inspection for Friday. Then you'd better push it back, Isabella said, standing. Because if we don't fix this properly, the whole structure's at risk. If we push it back, we lose our occupancy permit timeline. The owner's going to pull funding. Then the owner's an idiot. Morrison's face went red. You can't just... I can, because I'm the one who has to sign off on this repair. And I'm not putting my name on anything that's going to get people killed. Isabella's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. You want to rush this? Fine. Find another engineer, but I guarantee they're going to tell you the same thing. Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just turned and walked away, pulling out his phone. Liam watched him go, then looked at Isabella. You just made an enemy. Wouldn't be the first time. He's going to try to cut you out of the project. Let him try. She picked up her tool bag. Come on, we've got work to do. They spent the rest of the day setting up the repair. Isabella mapped out exactly where the reinforcement plates needed to go, and Liam ran the calculations to make sure the new footing would distribute the load properly. It was slow, meticulous work, and by the time the sun started to set, Liam's back was screaming and his hands were covered in concrete dust. You ever think about doing something easier? He asked, leaning against a stack of rebar. Isabella looked up from the drawings she was reviewing. Like what? I don't know, consulting, teaching, something where you don't have to get your hands dirty. I like getting my hands dirty. Yeah, but what? I should sit in an office and let other people do the real work? She shook her head. That's not who I am. I know, Liam trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. Isabella set down the drawings and walked over to him. You worried about me? Maybe. Don't be. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but that doesn't mean you should have to do it alone. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or something softer. I'm not alone. Not anymore. Liam met her eyes, and for a second the construction site fell away. The noise, the cold, the constant pressure, all of it just disappeared, and it was just the two of them standing there in the fading light. Then Isabella's phone rang, shattering the moment. She answered it, her expression shifting from soft to guarded in an instant. What is it? Liam couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he could see Isabella's face tightening with each word. How bad? She asked. Then, when? And finally, I'll be there in an hour. She hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at her phone. What happened? Liam asked. That was my plant manager. There's been an accident at the fabrication facility. What kind of accident? A crane collapsed. 3 workers were injured, one of them seriously. Her voice was flat, controlled, but Liam could see the fear underneath. I need to go. Do you want me to come with you? Isabella looked at him, and he saw her hesitate. Saw her start to say no, to fall back on that instinct to handle everything herself. But then she nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. They drove to Gary and Isabella's truck, the silence between them heavy with unspoken things. The fabrication plant was on the south side of the city, a sprawling complex of warehouses and cranes that looked like something out of an industrial nightmare. When they pulled up, there were already 2 ambulances in the parking lot, their lights painting the buildings red and blue. Workers stood in small clusters, talking in low voices, and Liam could see the collapsed crane in the distance, a massive piece of equipment that had come down on top of a stack of steel beams. Isabella was out of the truck before Liam could say anything, striding toward the plant manager, a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a face that looked 10 years older than it probably was. Talk to me, Isabella said. Crane was moving a load of H-beams when the cable snapped, came down on the northwest corner. 3 guys were in the blast radius. How bad? 2 broken bones, some cuts and bruises. They're being transported now, but Miguel, the plant manager's voice cracked. Miguel was underneath, crushed his leg. They had to use a torch to cut him free. Isabella closed her eyes for a second, and Liam saw her hands clench into fists. Is he going to be okay? They don't know yet. He's on his way to County General. I want a full investigation. Every cable, every inspection record, every maintenance log. I want to know why this happened. Already on it. Isabella nodded, then turned to the workers standing nearby. Everyone listen up. We're shutting down operations for the rest of the day. I want safety teams going over every piece of equipment, and no one goes back to work until I'm satisfied that this facility is safe. Understood? There were murmurs of agreement, and the workers started to disperse. Liam walked over to Isabella. You okay? No. She looked at the collapsed crane, her jaw tight. This shouldn't have happened. We run safety checks every week. Every piece of equipment gets inspected. Accidents happen. Not like this. Not on my watch. Liam wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that she couldn't control everything, but he knew it wouldn't help. So instead he asked, What can I do? Isabella looked at him, and some of the tension in her face eased. Come with me to the hospital. I need to see Miguel. They drove to County General in silence. The hospital was a gray concrete building that looked like it had been built in the 70s and hadn't been updated since. They found Miguel's family in the waiting room, his wife, his 2 kids, and an older woman who Liam assumed was his mother. When Miguel's wife saw Isabella, she stood up, her face streaked with tears. Ms. Cruz, I'm so sorry, Isabella said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry this happened. Miguel's wife shook her head. It's not your fault. He was working for me. That makes it my fault. He loves that job. He tells me all the time how proud he is to work for Cruz Steel. She wiped her eyes. This was an accident, a terrible accident. Isabella looked like she wanted to argue, but she just nodded. How is he? In surgery. They're trying to save his leg. Isabella sat down next to her, and for the next 2 hours they waited together. Liam sat across from them, watching Isabella hold Miguel's wife's hand, watching her talk quietly to the kids, watching her carry the weight of everything like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Around midnight, a doctor came out. Miguel had made it through surgery. His leg was badly damaged, but they'd managed to save it. He'd need months of physical therapy, but he'd walk again. The relief in the waiting room was palpable. Miguel's wife started crying, and Isabella pulled her into a hug. And for a moment, Liam saw past all the armor she wore, saw the person underneath who cared so much it was killing her. They left the hospital around 1 a.m. Isabella drove them back to the fabrication plant to pick up Liam's truck, but when they got there, she didn't get out. She just sat there, her hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. You want to talk about it? Liam asked quietly. About what? About whatever's going on in your head right now. Isabella was quiet for a long time. Then she said, My father built this company from nothing. He started with a small shop in Gary, just him and 2 employees, and he turned it into something real, something that mattered. She paused. When he died, he left it to me. Not my brothers, not my uncles. Me. And everyone said I'd destroy it within a year. But you didn't. No, I grew it, doubled the revenue, expanded into 3 new markets, hired 200 more people. She turned to look at him. But every day I wake up wondering if today's the day I'm going to prove them right. If today's the day everything falls apart. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. Because I've seen you work. I've seen how much you care, how hard you fight. You're not going to let this company fail. Isabella smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You sound pretty sure. I am. Why? Liam thought about it. Because you're the stubbornest person I've ever met, and that's saying something. This time, her smile was real. Thanks, I think. You're welcome. They sat there for another moment, and then Isabella reached over and squeezed his hand. Just once. Just for a second. But it was enough. Come on, she said. Let's get you home. The next 2 days were a blur. Liam and Isabella worked around the clock to repair the cracked column, pouring concrete in shifts and installing the reinforcement plates with a precision that bordered on obsessive. The rest of the crew watched them like they'd lost their minds, but no one said anything. Maybe because they'd heard about Miguel. Maybe because they'd seen the article about Delmar and knew something bigger was happening. Morrison stayed away, which was probably for the best. He'd tried calling Liam twice, but Liam had let it go to voicemail both times. Whatever the project owner wanted, it could wait. On the third day, just as they were finishing the final welds, Sarah Vance showed up at the site. "Got a minute?" she asked Liam. He set down his tools and walked over. "What's up?" "Well, Delmar's been formally charged. Bribery, fraud, conspiracy to commit criminal mischief. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. Liam felt a grim satisfaction. "Good. Bars Bolsamouds." "And Marcus Haviland's under investigation. The FBI is involved now. Turns out he's been running this scheme for years, paying off inspectors, sabotaging projects, buying up failing companies for pennies. Is there enough evidence to convict him?" "Hard to say. His lawyers are good, but between the emails, the bank records, and Delmar's testimony, there's a decent chance." Liam nodded. "Thanks for the update." Sarah studied him. "You look like hell, by the way." "Thanks." "I mean it. When's the last time you slept?" "I don't remember." "You should go home, get some rest. Let someone else finish this." Liam looked back at the structure, at Isabella crouched over a weld with the same focused intensity she'd had since the first night he met her. "Can't. Not yet." Sarah followed his gaze and smiled. "She's something else, isn't she?" "Yeah, she is." "You two make a good team." Liam didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. Sarah left, and Liam went back to work. By the time the sun set, they'd finished the repair. The column was solid, the reinforcement plates were in place, and the concrete had cured enough to handle the load. Isabella stood back and looked at their work, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Think it'll hold?" "I know it will." She smiled. "You say that a lot." "Because it's true." They packed up their tools in silence, and when they were done, Isabella turned to him. "Morrison scheduled the final inspection for tomorrow morning." "That fast?" "He doesn't want to give anyone time to cause more problems." She paused. "You going to be there?" "Wouldn't miss it." "Good." She picked up her tool bag. "Because I'm going to need you." Liam wanted to tell her she didn't need anyone, that she was strong enough to handle anything on her own. But he knew that wasn't what she was saying, so instead he just nodded. "I'll be there." That night, Liam went home and actually slept. 8 full hours, the first time in a week. When he woke up, Emma was already at the kitchen table eating cereal and doing her homework. "Big day?" she asked, not looking up. "Yeah, big day." "You nervous?" "A little." "You'll do great. You always do." Liam smiled. "When'd you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't notice because you're tired all the time." "Fair point." He made coffee, got dressed, and drove to the site one last time. The final inspection was scheduled for 9, and when Liam arrived at 8:30, the place was already crowded. Morrison was there, along with the project owner, 2 city inspectors Liam had never seen before, and a handful of engineers from other firms. And Isabella standing near the entrance with her arms crossed, looking like she was ready for a fight. "They brought in outside inspectors," she said when Liam walked over. "Morrison's trying to cover his ass." "Can't blame him." "I can and I will." She looked at the structure. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." The inspection took 3 hours. The new inspectors went over every inch of the building, every weld, every connection, every repair they'd made. They took measurements, ran tests, and asked questions that made Liam's head spin. But in the end, they found nothing wrong. The lead inspector, a woman in her 40s with gray hair and sharp eyes, signed off on the final report and handed it to Morrison. "Structure's sound," she said. "Good work." "Beecham, son." Morrison looked like he wanted to say something, but he just nodded. Isabella let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for weeks, and Liam felt something in him finally unclench. They'd done it. Against sabotage, corruption, and every obstacle thrown in their way, they'd finished the job. After the inspection team left, the construction site fell into an odd kind of silence. The crew had gone back to work, the hum of machinery filling the air again, but Liam and Isabella stood apart from it all, watching the structure they'd fought so hard to save. "You should go home," Isabella said finally. "Get some rest. So should you." I will, eventually. She turned to look at him. Thank you, Carter, for everything. Liam shook his head. You keep saying that. You don't need to. I know. But I want to. She paused, and something shifted in her expression. I couldn't have done this without you. Yeah, you could have. You're stubborn. I know. You've mentioned it. She smiled, but it faded quickly. But stubborn only gets you so far. At some point, you need someone who actually gives a damn standing next to you. Liam felt something tighten in his chest. I give a damn. I know you do. That's why I'm saying thank you. They stood there for another moment, neither of them quite ready to leave, and then Isabella's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and sighed. My board, she said. They've been calling all morning. You should take it. Yeah. She started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. You free tomorrow night? Liam blinked. What? Tomorrow night. Are you free? Yeah, I guess. Why? Because I want to buy you dinner, a real one, not gas station sandwiches eaten on a freezing construction site. Liam felt his face warm. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to. She held his gaze. Unless you'd rather not. No, Liam stopped, realizing how that sounded. I mean, yeah, dinner sounds good. Isabella smiled. Good. I'll text you the details. She answered her phone and walked away, leaving Liam standing there feeling like he'd just been hit by something he hadn't seen coming. He drove home in a daze, his mind replaying the conversation over and over. Dinner. Isabella Cruz, CEO of a billion-dollar company, the woman who'd welded through the night and stared down corrupt inspectors without flinching, wanted to have dinner with him. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense, but somehow it also made perfect sense. When he got home, Emma was at the kitchen table again, this time working on a drawing. She looked up when he walked in. You look weird, she said. Thanks. No, like, happy weird. Did something good happen? Liam sat down across from her. The project passed inspection. That's good, right? Yeah, that's really good. Emma studied him. Is there something else? That's really... What do you mean? You're smiling. You never smile when you talk about work. Liam realized she was right. I guess I am. So what happened? He thought about how to explain it, how to tell his 8-year-old daughter that he'd spent the last week working with someone who made him feel like he wasn't just surviving anymore. Like maybe there was something more than just bills and inspections and trying to keep his head above water. I met someone, he said finally. Emma's eyes widened. Like a girlfriend? No, I mean, not exactly. Just someone I'm having dinner with tomorrow. That sounds like a girlfriend. It's not that simple. Why not? Liam opened his mouth to explain, then realized he didn't have a good answer. Because it's complicated. Emma went back to her drawing, but he could see the smile on her face. You should wear the blue shirt, the one Grandma got you for Christmas. It's just dinner, Em. The blue shirt, she repeated, not looking up. Liam smiled despite himself. All right, the blue shirt. The next day dragged. Liam tried to focus on paperwork, inspection reports that needed filing, invoices that needed processing, but his mind kept wandering. He checked his phone every 10 minutes, waiting for Isabella's text, and when it finally came through around 2 in the afternoon, he read it 3 times. Rossi's on Taylor Street, 7 p.m., casual. He typed back, I'll be there. Her response came immediately. Looking forward to it, Liam set his phone down and sat there staring at the screen, wondering what the hell he was doing. He hadn't been on a date, if that's what this was, in over 3 years. Not since Emma's mother had left, taking half his savings and all his trust with her. But this felt different. Isabella felt different. At 6:30, Liam put on the blue shirt Emma had insisted on and checked himself in the bathroom mirror. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep was going to fix. But he also looked hopeful, like maybe things were starting to turn around. You look nice, Emma said from the doorway. Thanks, kiddo. Is she pretty? Liam thought about Isabella standing on that construction site at 4 in the morning, covered in soot and grease, her eyes blazing with determination. Yeah, she is. What's her name? Isabella? Emma nodded like that met with her approval. Have fun. And don't be weird. I'll try. He kissed her forehead, confirmed that the neighbor was coming over to watch her, and headed out. Rossi's was a small Italian place tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store. The kind of restaurant that looked like it had been there forever and would probably be there long after everything else had changed. Liam parked on the street and walked in, his heart hammering. Isabella was already there, sitting at a corner booth. She'd traded her coveralls for dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, and her hair was down for the first time since he'd met her. She looked up when he walked in, and her face broke into a smile that made something in his chest twist. Carter? She said as he slid into the booth across from her. You made it. I wouldn't miss it. I wasn't sure. Thought you might change your mind. Why would I do that, then? Isabella shrugged. Because spending time with your boss's boss outside of work is usually a bad idea. You're not my boss. No, but I'm the CEO of the company supplying the steel for the project you're inspecting. That's close enough. Liam smiled. The project's done. Inspection signed off. We're in the clear. Fair point. She picked up her menu, but he could see she was still smiling. Have you been here before? Never. It's my favorite place in the city. My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid. She paused, her expression softening. After he died, I stopped coming. Couldn't handle it. But a few years ago, I decided that was stupid. He'd want me to keep coming. What was he like, your dad? Isabella set down the menu. Tough, stubborn, demanded perfection from everyone, including himself. She smiled. You would have liked him. Sounds like someone else I know. Yeah, well, apple doesn't fall far. They ordered, Liam got the lasagna, Isabella got the chicken parm, and for the first time in days they talked about something other than construction. Isabella told him about growing up in Gary, about watching her father build the company from nothing, about the day he'd pulled her aside and told her she was going to run it someday. I was 19, she said, still in college, and he just looked at me and said, this is yours. Don't screw it up. Lot of pressure. Yeah, but he believed I could do it. That mattered more than anything. Liam told her about Emma, about the divorce, about the long nights trying to figure out how to be both a father and a provider when he could barely manage either one. You're doing better than you think, Isabella said. How do you know? Because she called you when she was scared. Because she waited on the steps for you to come home. Because when you talk about her, you light up. Isabella leaned forward. You're a good dad, Carter. Don't let anyone tell you different. Liam felt his throat tighten. Thanks. I mean it. They talked until the restaurant started to empty out, until the waiter had refilled their water glasses 3 times and was clearly waiting for them to leave. When they finally stepped outside, the temperature had dropped and the streets were slick with ice. Can I walk you to your car? Liam asked. It's 2 blocks. I think I'll manage. I know you'll manage. I'm asking anyway. Isabella smiled. All right, you can walk me to my car. They walked in comfortable silence, their breath fogging in the cold air. And when they reached her truck, Isabella turned to face him. I had a good time tonight, she said. Me too. We should do this again, when we're not both exhausted. I'd like that. Isabella hesitated, then reached out and squeezed his hand. You're a good man, Liam Carter. Don't forget that. Before he could respond, she climbed into her truck and drove away, leaving him standing on the sidewalk with his heart pounding and a smile he couldn't quite shake. Over the next few weeks, the Randolph project moved forward without incident. The sabotage had stopped, whether because Delmar and Haviland's arrests had scared off whoever was responsible, or because there simply wasn't anyone left to do the dirty work. Liam didn't know. But the silence was a relief. He and Isabella fell into an easy rhythm. They'd meet on site a few times a week, checking the progress, making sure everything stayed on track. And sometimes, when the work was done, they'd grab coffee or walk through the neighborhood talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't a relationship exactly. Neither of them had put a name to it, but it was something that felt solid and real in a way Liam hadn't experienced in years. Then 3 weeks after the final inspection, Isabella called him in the middle of the night. I need your help, she said, her voice tight. Liam sat up, instantly awake. What's wrong? Miguel, the worker who was injured. He's being evicted. His landlord found out about the accident and decided he's a liability. Can he do that? Legally? Probably not. But Miguel doesn't have the money to fight it, and he can't work right now because of his leg. She paused. I'm trying to find him a new place. He paused. I'm trying. But everything's too expensive. I was wondering if you might know someone, a landlord who'd be willing to work with him. Liam thought for a moment. How soon does he need it? End of the week. Let me make some calls. He spent the next 2 days working the phone, reaching out to every contact he had. Most of them said no. The rental market in Chicago was brutal, and no one wanted to take a chance on someone who couldn't pay full rent. But finally, on the third day, he found someone. A landlord on the south side who had a 2-bedroom apartment opening up and was willing to work out a payment plan. When Liam called Isabella with the news, she was silent for a long moment. You found him a place, she said finally. Yeah, it's not much, but it's safe and it's affordable. Carter, Her voice cracked. Thank you. You don't have to. I do, because you didn't have to do this. You didn't owe Miguel anything, but you did it anyway. Liam thought about that, about the idea that helping someone required owing them something first. That's not how it works, he said quietly. What do you mean? You don't help people because you owe them. You help them because it's the right thing to do. Isabella was quiet again, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. You really believe that? Yeah, I do. Then you're a better person than most people I know. The next week, Isabella invited Liam to the fabrication plant. Miguel was back at work, light duty, nothing that put strain on his leg, and the company was throwing a small celebration, nothing fancy, just pizza and cake in the break room. But when Liam walked in, Miguel stood up and shook his hand. Mr. Carter, he said, Ms. Cruz told me what you did, finding me that apartment. It wasn't a big deal. It was to me, to my family. Miguel's eyes were bright. I don't know how to thank you, and you don't need to. Just take care of yourself. And that leg. Miguel smiled. I will. After the celebration, Isabella walked Liam out to his truck. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the fabrication plant looked almost beautiful in the fading light. You didn't have to come all the way out here, Isabella said. I wanted to. She leaned against his truck, her arms crossed. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you do this? The inspections, the long hours, the jobs that barely pay enough to cover rent. You're good enough to work anywhere. You could be making 3 times what you make now. Liam thought about it, about all the times he'd asked himself the same question. Because someone has to make sure the buildings don't fall down. And if I don't do it right, people get hurt. That's it? That's the whole reason? Isn't that enough? Isabella looked at him and he saw something shift in her expression. Yeah, I guess it is. They stood there in the quiet, and Liam realized that this feeling of being understood, of being seen, was what he'd been looking for all along. I should get home, he said finally. Emma's got a school thing tonight. Yeah, of course. Isabella pushed off the truck. But before you go, there's something I want to show you. She led him back into the plant, through the fabrication floor to a small office in the back. On the wall was a framed photograph of a man in his 60s standing next to a younger Isabella. They were both wearing hard hats and coveralls, both smiling. That's my dad, Isabella said. Last day before he retired. He handed the company over to me the next morning. He looks proud. He was, even though everyone thought he was crazy for giving the company to his daughter instead of one of his sons. She turned to Liam. You know what he told me that day? What? He said, the steel doesn't care who's in charge. It only cares if you respect it. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About respect. About how the people who deserve it the most are usually the ones who never ask for it. Liam didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Isabella smiled. You remind me of him, Carter. You've got the same, same integrity, same refusal to cut corners, even when it'd be easier. I'm just doing my job. No, you're doing it right. There's a difference. She walked him back to his truck, and before he got in, she leaned up and kissed his cheek. Drive safe, she said. Liam sat in his truck for a full minute after she walked away. his hand on his cheek, wondering how his life had gotten so complicated and so simple at the same time. 2 months later, the Randolph Street project was finished. The building stood 30 stories tall, all glass and steel, a testament to everything they'd fought to protect. There was an opening ceremony, speeches from the project owner, champagne for the investors, photos for the press. Liam stood in the back, watching it all with a mix of pride and exhaustion. He'd done his part. The structure was sound. People would work in this building for decades, and they'd never know how close it had come to falling apart. Isabella found him near the end of the ceremony. She was wearing a suit instead of coveralls, and she looked every bit the CEO everyone expected her to be. "You leaving?" she asked. "Yeah, I've got another inspection in the morning." "Always working. So are you." She smiled. "Fair point." She looked up at the building. "We did good work here." "Yeah, we did. You ever think about what comes next?" Liam thought about the stack of inspection reports waiting on his desk, about the bills that never seemed to stop coming, about Emma asking him when he was going to stop working so much. "Not really. I just try to get through the day." "Maybe you should." "Why's that?" Isabella turned to face him. "Because Cruz Steel just got approved for a major project downtown. 40-story mixed-use tower. And I need a structural engineer I can trust." Liam stared at her. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership. You handle the engineering and oversight. I handle the fabrication and supply. We work together. Make sure it's done right." "Isabella, You don't have to answer now. Think about it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. "But if you're interested, call me." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing there with the card in his hand and his mind racing. That night, Liam sat Emma down and told her about the offer. "You should take it," she said immediately. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because it means more responsibility, more time away from home, more—" "Dad?" Emma looked at him with an expression far too serious for an 8-year-old. "You've been sad for a really long time, and then you met Isabella, and you stopped being sad. So if she's offering you something that makes you happy, you should say yes." Liam felt his throat tighten. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just forget sometimes." He pulled her into a hug, and she wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in years, Liam felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The next morning, he called Isabella. "I'm in," he said when she answered. There was a pause. "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." "Good." He could hear the smile in her voice. "Because I already put your name on the contract." "You what?" "I knew you'd say yes." "That's pretty presumptuous." "That's confidence. There's a difference." Liam laughed. "When do we start?" "How about tomorrow? I'll show you the site." "Tomorrow works." "Good." "And Carter?" "Yeah?" "Thanks for taking a chance on this." "On me." "You're the one taking a chance on me." "No," Isabella said quietly. "I don't think I am." 6 months later, Liam stood on another construction site with Isabella, watching the sun rise over Chicago. The new project was underway, steel beams climbing into the sky, concrete foundations curing in the cold morning air. It was bigger than the Randolph project, more complex, with more things that could go wrong. But Liam wasn't afraid, because this time he wasn't working alone. He had a partner who understood what it meant to do things right, who valued integrity over profit, safety over speed, who taught him that stubbornness wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. "You ready for this?" Isabella asked, standing next to him with her hands in her pockets. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good, because it's going to be a long year." "I've had longer." She smiled. "Yeah, you have." They stood there in silence, watching the crew arrive, watching the site come to life. And Liam realized that this partnership, this shared purpose, was what he'd been searching for all along. Not just a job or a paycheck or a way to keep his head above water, but something more. Something that mattered. Emma had been right. He'd been sad for a long time, buried under the weight of bills and inspections and the constant struggle to prove he was worth something. But Isabella had shown him a different way, had shown him that doing the work right wasn't just about following codes or passing inspections. It was about building something that would last. Something that would protect the people who depended on it long after he was gone. You know what the best part is? Isabella said, breaking the silence. What's that? No one's trying to sabotage us this time. Liam laughed. Give it a week. Optimist. Realist. She elbowed him gently. Come on, let's get to work. They walked onto the site together, side by side, and Liam felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be. The steel didn't care who was in charge. It only cared if you respected it. And Liam Carter, broke single father, blacklisted engineer, stubborn bastard who refused to compromise, had learned to respect it well.